Section 1. The Mud of Normandy and the Genesis of an Idea. The autumn of 1944. A narrow, rutted lane somewhere in the churned landscape of northern France. Rain, a persistent, chilling drizzle, had been falling for 3 straight days, turning the soil into a thick, greedy paste that clung to everything. A German staff car, a handsome, powerful machine of polished black steel and proud engineering, was hopelessly mired. Its rear wheels spun uselessly, flinging arcs of dark mud against the dripping hedgerows. Inside, an officer, his uniform immaculate despite the grim surroundings, stared through the rain-streaked glass with a mask of cold frustration. His driver, a young man with weary eyes, had tried everything, rocking the vehicle back and forth, stuffing broken branches under the tires for traction. But the earth had claimed their symbol of authority. For nearly an hour, they had been immobile, a perfect, stationary target in a landscape where movement was life. Then, they heard it. Not the guttural roar of a German engine, nor the clatter of a half-track, but a high-pitched, almost cheerful whine. It grew closer, and through the mist, a strange vehicle appeared. It was small, boxy, and utterly devoid of the intimidating presence of their own military hardware. It looked almost like a toy, something cobbled together in a backyard workshop. Painted a drab olive green, it bounced and jostled over the very same terrain that had defeated their superior automobile. It was an American Jeep. 2 soldiers sat in its open frame, seemingly unbothered by the rain, their helmets gleaming with moisture. The Jeep didn't slow. It approached the mired staff car, its narrow tires finding purchase where the German vehicle's broader ones had failed, and with a final, determined whir of its small engine, it skirted the worst of the mud and continued down the lane, disappearing as quickly as it had arrived. The German officer watched it go, his frustration mingling with a new, unsettling emotion, a flicker of grudging respect. This small, unassuming machine could go where his could not. This was not the first time such an observation had been made, and it would not be the last. The story of this remarkable vehicle, however, did not begin in the mud of France, but 4 years earlier, in a time of desperate urgency, born from a simple yet profound military need. In the spring of 1940, the United States Army was awakening to the realities of a new kind of warfare, a war of speed and maneuver that was unfolding with terrifying efficiency across the fields of Europe. The Blitzkrieg, a storm of coordinated armor, air power, and infantry, had rewritten the rules of engagement. The American military, still largely operating with equipment and doctrines from a previous generation, recognized a critical gap in its own capabilities. Its light reconnaissance and utility vehicles were a motley collection of motorcycles, often with sidecars, and militarized versions of civilian cars, like the Ford Model T. These were adequate for the paved roads and predictable terrain of peacetime, but they were woefully unprepared for the broken, off-road battlefields of modern conflict. Motorcycles were vulnerable and had limited cargo capacity. The converted cars lacked the robust chassis and, most importantly, the all-wheel drive capability to navigate shell-pocked fields, dense forests, or muddy tracks. The Army needed something new, something small, lightweight and nimble, yet tough enough to survive the rigors of combat. It needed a vehicle that could carry a few soldiers and a machine gun, act as a command car, tow a small artillery piece, and traverse terrain that would stop a truck in its tracks. It needed a mechanical mule, a go-anywhere, do-anything workhorse. On June 27, 1940, the U.S. Army Ordnance Technical Committee formalized this need, drafting a seemingly impossible list of specifications. The vehicle had to have 4-wheel drive, a crew capacity of 3, a wheelbase of no more than 75 inches, a height of no more than 36 inches, and a weight of no more than 1,300 pounds. It had to be capable of carrying a 600-pound payload And most dauntingly of all, a working prototype had to be delivered for testing in just 49 days. The request was sent out to 135 American manufacturing companies. The timeline was so aggressive, the specifications so demanding, that it was seen by most as an exercise in futility. The giants of the automotive industry, General Motors and Ford, initially showed little interest, bogged down by their vast civilian production commitments and skeptical of the project's feasibility. The challenge was immense. To design and hand-build a completely new vehicle from scratch in less than 2 months was a task that bordered on the impossible. 133 companies declined or failed to respond. Only 2, it seemed, were willing to even attempt the Herculean task: Willys Overland and the American Bantam Car Company. The stage was set for one of the most remarkable and rapid feats of engineering in military history, a race against time that would not only produce a vehicle, but forge a legend. The seed of an idea, born from the mud and the new reality of war, was about to sprout in the fertile ground of American industrial ingenuity. Section 2. The Impossible Deadline and the Bantam Miracle. The story of the Jeep's creation is, at its heart, the story of an underdog. Of the 2 companies that initially accepted the Army's challenge, Willys Overland, based in Toledo, Ohio, was a known entity, a mid-sized automaker with a solid engineering department. But it was the American Bantam Car Company of Butler, Pennsylvania, that would take the first decisive steps. Bantam was a small, struggling firm, a spiritual successor to the American Austin Car Company, which had specialized in building tiny, fuel-efficient cars licensed from the British Austin Motor Company. The Great Depression had been unkind to Bantam, and by 1940, the company was teetering on the brink of financial collapse. For Bantam's president, Roy Evans, the Army's contract was not just an opportunity, it was a lifeline. He saw it as the company's last chance for survival. Yet, Bantam had a significant problem. It lacked a chief engineer and had a skeleton staff. The technical challenge was far beyond its in-house capabilities. Realizing this, Evans and his team made a pivotal decision. They reached out to Carl Probst, a talented freelance automotive engineer based in Detroit. Probst was initially hesitant. He understood the absurdity of the timeline and the complexity of the design. The Army's weight requirement of 1,300 pounds alone seemed unattainable for a durable 4-wheel drive vehicle. However, Bantam's persistence, and perhaps the sheer audacity of the challenge, won him over. On July 17, 1940, Probst agreed to lead the project, reportedly working without salary, gambling on the possibility that if Bantam won the contract, he would be rewarded. What followed was a whirlwind of creative and intellectual fury. Probst moved into a hotel room in Butler and began to work. For 2 straight days, he sketched, calculated, and designed, barely stopping for food or sleep. He drew upon his extensive knowledge of the automotive industry, conceptualizing a vehicle that was a masterclass in functional simplicity. He knew that to meet the deadline, he couldn't invent everything from scratch. He would have to use as many reliable, off-the-shelf components as possible. The axles were a modified design from Studebaker, the transmission and transfer case were sourced from Spicer, and the engine was a 45-horsepower L-head 4-cylinder from Continental. The genius of Probst's design was not in revolutionary new technology, but in the brilliant integration of existing, proven parts into a lightweight, robust, and perfectly balanced whole. He laid out the basic architecture that would define the Jeep for decades to come. A simple, rectangular ladder frame, a flat-fendered, slab-sided body, a fold-down windshield, and an engine up front, powering all 4 wheels. While Probst worked on the blueprints, the team at the Bantam factory, a small but dedicated group of mechanics and metalworkers, prepared for the monumental task of building the prototype by hand. They worked in shifts, around the clock, fueled by coffee and a sense of patriotic duty. The factory floor buzzed with an energy born of desperation and determination. They called their creation the Blitz Buggy. As the 49-day deadline loomed, the pressure mounted. The team faced countless setbacks, parts arriving late, modifications needing to be made on the fly, but they never wavered. Finally, on September 21st, 1940, just 2 days before the deadline, the prototype was complete. It was named the Bantam Reconnaissance Car, or BRC. With no time to spare, it was driven directly from the factory in Butler to the Army's testing grounds at Camp Holabird, Maryland, a journey of over 200 miles. It arrived on September 23rd, with less than 30 minutes to spare. The Army's Evaluation Committee, a group of skeptical officers and engineers, gathered to inspect the strange-looking vehicle. It was smaller than they had imagined, almost toy-like, but it looked purposeful. The tests began immediately. The Bantam BRC was subjected to a grueling ordeal, designed to break it. It was driven through deep mud pits, navigated steep, rocky inclines, and made to wade through water. The officers watched, their initial skepticism slowly melting away, replaced by sheer astonishment. This little car refused to quit. It climbed hills so steep that the driver had to lean forward to keep the front wheels on the ground. It churned through mud that would have swallowed a standard truck. Its lightweight, short wheelbase and four-wheel drive gave it an agility that was nothing short of revolutionary. It had not only met, but exceeded the Army's performance expectations. The Bantam team had achieved the impossible. They had designed and built a working prototype of a revolutionary military vehicle in just 49 days. However, their victory was to be bittersweet. The Army, while deeply impressed with the BRC's design, had serious doubts about Bantam's ability to produce the vehicle in the massive quantities that would be needed for a global war. The small company from Butler had won the design battle, but the war for the production contract was just beginning, and two industrial giants were now watching with intense interest. Section 3. The Power of the Go Devil and the Rise of the MB. The successful trials of the Bantam BRC at Camp Holabird sent a clear signal to the rest of the automotive industry and the War Department. The concept of a light, four-wheel drive reconnaissance car was not just viable, but essential. However, the story took a controversial turn. The Army, needing to ensure a massive and uninterrupted supply chain, made a decision that would forever alter the vehicle's legacy. Citing Bantam's limited production capacity, the Army declared the BRC design to be government property and handed the blueprints over to Willys Overland and Ford Motor Company, inviting them to submit their own improved prototypes. It was a pragmatic, if harsh, decision driven by the looming threat of war. Bantam, the small innovator that had risked everything, was effectively being sidelined. Willys Overland, having initially asked for a longer deadline, now moved with incredible speed. Their engineering team, led by the brilliant Delmar Barney Roos, saw one major area for improvement in the Bantam design: the engine. While the BRC's Continental engine was adequate, Roos knew Willys had something far superior in its arsenal. It was the L1 134 four-cylinder engine, affectionately nicknamed the Go Devil. This engine was the heart of the Willys Americar, a civilian passenger car, but Roos saw its potential for military application. He and his team subjected the Go Devil to a series of rigorous modifications, strengthening its components, improving its cooling system, and ensuring it could withstand the constant abuse of military service. The result was a masterpiece of reliability and power. The modified Go Devil produced 60 horsepower, a full 33% more than the Bantam's engine, and a formidable 105 pound-feet of torque. This was the crucial difference. The extra power meant the vehicle could not only move itself with greater authority, but could also carry heavier loads and tow equipment more effectively without straining the engine. In November of 1940, Willys delivered its prototype, the Willys Quad, to Camp Holabird. It was visually similar to the Bantam BRC, but it was heavier, largely due to the more robust engine and chassis components. It easily exceeded the Army's initial and unrealistic 1,300-pound weight limit. At the same time, Ford, leveraging its immense manufacturing expertise, developed its own prototype, the Ford Pygmy. It too was heavily influenced by the Bantam design, but featured some unique innovations, such as a flat hood and headlights integrated into the grille, features that would later be incorporated into the final standardized model. A new round of intense testing began, pitting the Bantam BRC-40, the Willys Quad, and the Ford Pygmy against each other. Each vehicle performed admirably, but the Willys prototype consistently demonstrated a clear advantage in one critical area: power. The Go Devil engine was simply in a class of its own. It allowed the quad to accelerate faster, climb steeper grades, and pull through the deepest mud with an authority the other two vehicles couldn't match. The Army was faced with a difficult choice. The Bantam design was the original and the lightest. The Ford design showed manufacturing ingenuity. But the Willys vehicle had the best engine. The weight limit, once a strict requirement, was now seen as a secondary concern to performance and durability. The Army revised the weight specification upward to 2,160 pounds, effectively acknowledging that a truly robust vehicle required more substance. In the end, the decision was a pragmatic amalgamation. The Willys prototype, with its superior Go Devil engine, was selected as the basis for the new standard Army truck. However, the Army, ever mindful of the need for a vast and redundant supply chain, incorporated several design features from the Ford Pygmy. Most notably, its easier-to-produce flat hood and grille. The final standardized vehicle was designated the Willys MB. The M stood for military, and the B indicated it was the second revision of their design. To meet the astronomical production demands, the Army made another critical decision. Willys Overland would be the primary contractor, but Ford Motor Company would be licensed to produce an identical version of the MB to ensure a second source of supply. The Ford-built version was designated the GPW. The G stood for government contract. The P was a Ford designation for a car with an 80-inch wheelbase, and the W signified that it was built to the Willys design. Every part on the Ford GPW had to be perfectly interchangeable with the corresponding part on the Willys MB. This was a cornerstone of the vehicle's future success, ensuring that on a distant battlefield, a mechanic could take a part from a damaged Ford and use it to repair a Willys, or vice versa. The era of the prototypes was over. The design had been finalized, the contracts had been awarded, and the industrial might of America was about to be unleashed. The stage was set for the mass production of a vehicle that would soon become ubiquitous on every front of the global conflict, a symbol of American mobility and industrial power, born from the combined genius of three competing companies. Section 4. The Symphony of Steel and the Arsenal of Democracy. The finalization of the Willys MB design in 1941 marked a pivotal transition from innovative prototyping to the staggering realities of wartime mass production. The vehicle that emerged was a triumph of functionalism, a machine stripped of all non-essential elements, built for a single purpose: to serve reliably under the most punishing conditions imaginable. Its specifications became legendary: a weight of just over 2,400 pounds, a wheelbase of 80 inches, and a ground clearance of nearly 9 inches. It was powered by the indomitable 60-horsepower Willys Go Devil engine, driving all four wheels through a 3-speed Warner T84 manual transmission and a Spicer 18 2-speed transfer case. This combination gave it its extraordinary off-road capability, allowing it to crawl over obstacles in low range or cruise at speeds up to 65 miles per hour on paved roads. The vehicle's design was a study in simplicity and utility. The body was a simple steel tub. The windshield could be folded flat onto the hood to reduce its silhouette and prevent glare. There were no doors, just open cutouts for quick entry and exit. The seats were simple canvas, stretched over metal frames. Every component was designed not only for durability, but also for ease of repair in the field. A soldier with a basic set of tools could perform most routine maintenance and many significant repairs, far from a fully equipped workshop. This philosophy of simplicity was the key to its success, but it was the scale of its production that transformed it from a useful vehicle into a war-winning tool. The primary production line was at the Willys Overland plant in Toledo, Ohio. This factory became the beating heart of the Jeep's creation, a place of relentless, organized motion. Thousands of men and women worked in shifts, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, their efforts part of the great national mobilization that President Franklin D. Roosevelt had termed the arsenal of democracy. The assembly line was a symphony of steel, a carefully choreographed dance of workers and machines. Bare frames entered at one end, and every few minutes, a fully assembled operational Willys MB would roll off the other, ready to be tested and shipped to fronts around the world. The sounds of the factory, the hiss of pneumatic wrenches, the clang of metal on metal, the roar of newly started engines, was the sound of a nation gearing up for a global struggle. To supplement this effort, Ford began producing its identical GPW model at several of its plants, including those in Louisville, Kentucky, Dallas, Texas, and Richmond, California. The genius of the standardized design meant that parts manufactured in a Ford factory in Texas would fit perfectly on a Willys vehicle being repaired in a field depot in North Africa. This absolute interchangeability was a logistical masterpiece, simplifying supply chains and ensuring that the maximum number of vehicles remained operational at all times. The numbers involved are staggering. Between 1941 and 1945, Willys Overland produced approximately 363,000 MBs. Ford, in the same period, manufactured around 280,000 GPWs. In total, more than 640,000 of these standardized light vehicles rolled off American assembly lines. This meant that, on average, a new Jeep was being completed every 90 seconds. This torrent of production was a weapon in itself. While other nations produced excellent, and in some cases, more technologically advanced vehicles, none could match the sheer volume and reliability that the American industrial base could deliver. The Jeep was not just built, it was poured onto the battlefield. This production miracle extended beyond just the two main manufacturers. The simplicity of the design allowed for extensive subcontracting. Companies that had previously made furniture, farm equipment, or even pianos were retooled to produce components for the Jeep. A small metalworking shop in the Midwest might find itself stamping out grills, while a textile factory on the East Coast produced canvas tops and seat covers. This distributed manufacturing model not only accelerated production, but also made the supply chain more resilient, spreading the industrial load across the entire country. The vehicles were shipped in every conceivable way. They were loaded by the hundreds into the holds of cargo ships for the perilous journey across the Atlantic and Pacific. They were packed in crates and sent as kits to be assembled in Allied countries, like Great Britain and the Soviet Union under the Lend-Lease program. They were even loaded onto aircraft, their compact size making them relatively easy to transport by air to remote or inaccessible theaters of operation. The symphony of production that created the Jeep was more than just an industrial achievement. It was a strategic advantage. It ensured that Allied forces, from the lowest-ranking infantry squad to the highest echelons of command, would have a degree of mobility and logistical support that their adversaries simply could not match. Before a single Jeep had proven itself in the mud of a foreign field, the battle of production had already been decisively won. Section 5. The arrival in Europe and the laughter of the Wehrmacht. The first appearance of the American Jeep on the battlefields of the Second World War was met not with fear, but with a mixture of curiosity, amusement, and derision by its German adversaries. For soldiers of the Wehrmacht, steeped in a tradition of heavy, formidable, and often complex engineering, the Jeep was an anomaly. It arrived first in small numbers through the Lend-Lease program, serving with British and Soviet forces, and then in a veritable flood with the American landings in North Africa in 1942, and later in Italy and France. A German soldier, accustomed to the sight of his own military vehicles, would have found the Jeep perplexing. Take, for example, the Volkswagen Type 82, better known as the Kübelwagen. It was the German Army's primary light utility vehicle and the closest counterpart to the Jeep. Designed by the legendary Ferdinand Porsche, the Kübelwagen was a clever and effective vehicle in its own right. It was lightweight, air-cooled, and remarkably rugged. However, it was fundamentally a militarized version of the people's car, and crucially, it was only two-wheel drive. Visually, it was low-slung with corrugated body panels for strength, possessing a certain angular efficiency. Then there were the more formidable German machines, like the Stake KEFs, 250 half-track, an armored personnel carrier that could traverse difficult terrain with its combination of front wheels and rear tracks. Or the powerful Horch and Mercedes-Benz staff cars, large, imposing vehicles that projected an image of strength and authority. Into this world of heavy steel and sophisticated engineering came the Jeep. To the German eye, it looked unfinished, almost crude. Its body was a simple box, its construction seemed flimsy, and its open-top design offered its occupants virtually no protection from the elements, let alone from enemy fire. The engine was small, and the vehicle itself lacked the intimidating physical presence that was so integral to the German military aesthetic. The initial reaction, documented in letters and informal reports, was often one of mockery. German soldiers nicknamed it the Amerikanischer Spielzeug, the American toy. They saw it as a symbol of a supposedly decadent and unserious American culture that prioritized mass-produced disposability over durable, master-crafted engineering. The laughter could be heard in encampments from the Kasserine Pass to the Gustav Line. How could such a small, fragile-looking machine possibly stand up to the rigors of a real war? It was seen as a product of a nation that built cars for comfort and style, not for the brutal demands of the battlefield. This perception was rooted in a fundamental difference in engineering and military philosophy. German engineering, particularly in military hardware, often prized technical sophistication and peak performance, sometimes at the expense of reliability and ease of maintenance. Their tanks, for example, were formidable fighting machines, but were often complex, requiring specialized crews and extensive logistical support to keep them running. The American approach, exemplified by the Jeep, was almost the polar opposite. The primary virtues were simplicity, reliability, mass producibility, and ease of field repair. The Jeep wasn't designed to be the best-performing vehicle in any single category. It was designed to be good enough in all of them, and to be available in overwhelming numbers. This philosophical divide was not immediately apparent to the soldiers on the ground. A German NCO, looking at a captured Jeep, might scoff at the simple leaf spring suspension or the basic, no-frills dashboard. He might compare its thin steel body to the sloped armor of a German half-track and shake his head in disbelief. He would see a vehicle built without pride, without the loving attention to detail that he associated with German craftsmanship. What he failed to see was the hidden genius in its design. He could not yet appreciate that its lightweight was a tremendous advantage, not a weakness. He did not understand that its four-wheel drive gave it a capability that his own Kübelwagen lacked. And he could not possibly comprehend the sheer, mind-boggling scale of its production. The fact that for every one vehicle his side lost, the Americans could bring in 10 more. The initial encounters were defined by this misunderstanding. German patrols would see jeeps buzzing along distant roads, looking more like farm implements than military vehicles. They would find them abandoned after a firefight, often with minor mechanical issues that a German mechanic might deem a major repair, unaware that an American GI with a wrench and a spare part could have it running again in 20 minutes. The laughter and the jokes continued for a time, a small comfort in the face of a growing storm. But as the war dragged on, as the terrain grew more difficult and the weather more unforgiving, the derision would slowly, quietly, begin to fade, replaced by a dawning and often grudging realization. The little American toy had a few tricks that no one had been expecting. Section 6. The Deserts of Africa and the Mountains of Italy. The laughter of the Wehrmacht began to die in the harsh, unforgiving landscapes where military theory met brutal reality. The first major proving ground for the Jeep, where it would be tested by both the elements and the enemy in massive numbers, was North Africa. The campaign, which began with Operation Torch in late 1942, was a war of vast distances, fought across a terrain of searing heat, blinding sandstorms, and rocky, barren wastelands. Here, the German Afrika Korps, under the skilled leadership of Erwin Rommel, had perfected a highly mobile form of warfare. They relied on their panzer tanks, supported by the ubiquitous Kübelwagen and other wheeled vehicles. In this environment, the Kübelwagen performed well. Its lightweight and air-cooled engine were assets in the desert heat. However, the desert also held traps of soft sand, where even the clever German vehicle could get bogged down. The Jeep, upon its arrival with American forces, immediately began to show its unique strengths. Its four-wheel drive system was a decisive advantage in the treacherous, soft going of deep sand. A Jeep could often power its way through patches of terrain that would leave its two-wheel drive German counterpart spinning its wheels. Furthermore, its simple, liquid-cooled Go Devil engine, while requiring water, proved to be remarkably resilient to the fine, abrasive sand that clogged air filters and plagued more complex machinery. The engine's straightforward design made it easy for field mechanics to clean and maintain, a critical factor in a theater where dust was a constant enemy. Soldiers quickly discovered the Jeep's versatility. It became the favored vehicle for long-range desert patrols. Its reliability and fuel efficiency, allowing small units to operate deep in enemy territory for extended periods. It served as a command car, allowing officers to move quickly between dispersed units across the vast, open landscape. It was a mobile communications post, a scout vehicle, and, when a .50 caliber machine gun was mounted on a pedestal in the back, a surprisingly effective light attack vehicle. Generals like George S. Patton became famous for their use of the Jeep, often racing to the front lines to direct battles from the open passenger seat, a visible and inspiring presence for their troops. The Jeep's ruggedness became the stuff of legend. It could absorb punishment that would sideline lesser vehicles. Its simple construction meant that even when damaged, it could often be patched up and sent back into service. But if the desert was a test of endurance and reliability, the campaign in Italy would be a trial by mud, mountains, and mire. After the Allied victory in North Africa, the invasion of Sicily, and the subsequent slog up the Italian peninsula presented a completely different set of challenges. Italy was a land of ancient, narrow roads, steep mountain passes, and, during the autumn and winter rainy seasons, an ocean of thick, viscous mud. Here, the tables were turned decisively against the Kugelwagen. Its two-wheel drive system was simply no match for the slippery, near-vertical mule tracks that often served as the only lines of advance. German units frequently found their mobility crippled as their utility vehicles became hopelessly stuck, blocking narrow roads and creating logistical nightmares. It was in this environment that the Jeep truly earned its reputation as a miracle of mobility. Allied soldiers would watch in amazement as the little vehicle, with all four wheels churning, would claw its way up muddy slopes that seemed impassable, even on foot. It became the indispensable lifeline for forward units. It ferried ammunition, food, and medical supplies to isolated outposts high in the Apennine Mountains. It evacuated the wounded, with stretchers often strapped across the hood or rigged up in the back, from areas that were completely inaccessible to standard ambulances. It laid communication wires, towed small anti-tank guns into position, and allowed commanders to maintain contact with their troops in the most difficult terrain. It was in Italy that the anecdotal evidence began to accumulate in German after-action reports. A German officer's report might note with frustration that an American unit had managed to flank a defensive position by advancing through a forest thought to be impassable to vehicles. A captured Allied soldier might be interrogated and speak of how they simply drove around a demolished bridge by fording a shallow river in their jeeps. German mechanics, tasked with recovering their own stuck vehicles, would sometimes find themselves being pulled out of the mire by a captured jeep, a moment of profound irony and tactical realization. The laughter had completely vanished. It was replaced by a quiet, professional respect, the kind one warrior affords to an adversary's unexpectedly effective weapon. The Jeep was no longer a Spielzeug. It was a tactical problem. It gave the Allies a degree of flexibility and operational tempo that the Germans struggled to counter. In the deserts of Africa, it had proven its toughness. In the mud-drenched mountains of Italy, it had demonstrated its supremacy. The stage was now set for its greatest performance in the final, decisive battles for Western Europe. Section 7. The Liberator of Europe and the Master of the Bocage. The invasion of Normandy on June 6, 1944, marked the beginning of the end of the conflict in Western Europe. As Allied forces poured ashore and began their fight inland, they brought with them tens of thousands of jeeps, a tide of olive-drab utility vehicles that would become the lifeblood of the advance. The initial battles were fought in the infamous Bocage country of Normandy, a landscape that presented a unique and formidable challenge to mechanized armies. The Bocage was a patchwork of small fields and orchards, separated by ancient, dense hedgerows. These were not simple hedges but massive earthen banks, often several feet thick and 10 feet high, topped with tangled trees and thorny bushes. Sunken lanes, worn down over centuries, snaked between them, creating a claustrophobic, ready-made fortress for defenders. This terrain was a nightmare for tanks and large trucks. The hedgerows were nearly impenetrable, and the narrow lanes created deadly funnels for ambushes. In this maze-like environment, the Jeep's specific set of attributes, its small size, short wheelbase, and tight turning radius, made it an invaluable asset. While larger vehicles were confined to the main roads, the Jeep could often navigate the narrowest of farm tracks and squeeze through gaps in the hedgerows that were impassable to anything else. It became the primary tool for reconnaissance units, which would probe ahead of the main advance, scouting German positions and mapping the confusing network of lanes. The Jeep's agility allowed these scouts to get in, get the information, and get out quickly, often before the defenders could bring heavy weapons to bear. Command and control, the nervous system of any army, became heavily reliant on the Jeep. Generals like Omar Bradley and Bernard Montgomery used them extensively to visit frontline commanders, their small size allowing them to travel with a degree of speed and discretion that a larger staff car could never afford. Communication lines, the vital link between headquarters and the front, were often laid by teams in Jeeps, unreeling spools of telephone wire as they drove along the hedgerows. The vehicle's ability to go nearly anywhere ensured that these lines could be laid through the safest and most direct routes, away from heavily shelled main roads. As the breakout from Normandy occurred and the Allied armies began their rapid advance across France, the Jeep's role evolved. It became the symbol of the liberating armies. In every French town and village, the first sign of freedom was often the appearance of a small, dusty Jeep, carrying American or British soldiers, its occupants often sharing rations and smiles with the jubilant local population. It was a vehicle of the people, approachable and unintimidating in a way that a tank could never be. The speed of the Allied pursuit of the retreating German armies was in no small part enabled by the logistical network that the Jeep supported. While heavy trucks carried the bulk of supplies on the main arteries, it was the Jeep that handled the last mile of distribution. It darted off the main roads, down dirt tracks, and across open fields to deliver fuel, ammunition, and food to the spearhead units, ensuring the momentum of the advance was never lost for want of essential supplies. During the Battle of the Bulge in the winter of 1944-45, the Jeep proved its worth yet again under the most extreme conditions. The surprise German offensive took place in the dense, snow-covered forests of the Ardennes. The weather was brutal, with deep snow, ice, and freezing temperatures. Roads became treacherous or impassable. In this environment, the Jeep's four-wheel drive was not just an advantage, it was a necessity. It was one of the few wheeled vehicles that could reliably navigate the frozen forest trails, allowing American forces to reposition troops, evacuate the wounded from surrounded positions like Bastogne, and maintain a cohesive defense in the face of the German onslaught. Throughout the campaign in Northwest Europe, from the beaches of Normandy to the heart of Germany, the Jeep was a constant, ubiquitous presence. It was the trusted mount of the military police guiding traffic at chaotic crossroads. It was the mobile platform for forward air controllers, who would race to high ground to direct fighter-bomber strikes on enemy positions. It was the workhorse of the engineers, carrying tools and explosives to repair bridges or clear obstacles. It was not a weapon that directly engaged the enemy in the way a tank or an artillery piece did, but it was a force multiplier. It enhanced the effectiveness of every other element of the army. It gave the Allied forces a level of tactical and logistical flexibility that was a constant source of frustration for their German opponents. By this point, any memory of the initial laughter was long gone, replaced by the hard-won respect for a machine that, despite its humble appearance, had mastered every terrain that Europe could throw at it. Section 8. The Thousand Faces of a Mechanical Mule. The genius of the Willys MB and Ford GPW lay not just in what it was designed to be, a light reconnaissance car, but in the almost limitless number of roles it could be adapted to fill through the ingenuity of the soldiers who used it. On every front, in every branch of the service, the Jeep was modified, customized, and repurposed to meet the ever-changing demands of the battlefield. It was less a single vehicle and more a versatile platform, a mechanical Swiss Army knife. Its official roles were already numerous: command and staff car, reconnaissance vehicle, communications line layer, and light cargo transport. But its unofficial applications were where its true character shone through. One of its most vital and visible roles was as a field ambulance. In areas too rough or too dangerous for conventional ambulances, the Jeep became a lifesaver. Medics would rig stretchers across the rear of the vehicle, sometimes extending them over the hood. A Jeep could navigate a shell-torn landscape or a narrow forest path to reach a wounded soldier, providing a swift evacuation that often meant the difference between life and loss. The sight of a Jeep with red crosses painted on its sides, bouncing determinedly toward the sound of conflict, was a profound symbol of hope for soldiers on the front line. The Jeep also became a weapon of war. While its thin steel body offered no real protection, its mobility made it an excellent platform for light and heavy-caliber machine guns. A common field modification involved mounting a 30 or 50 caliber machine gun on a pedestal in the rear passenger area. These gun jeeps could be used for convoy escort, for providing suppressive fire during an infantry assault, or for rapid response defense against enemy patrols. Their speed allowed them to quickly reposition, firing a few bursts from one location before racing to another, creating the illusion of a larger, more heavily armed force. Its Go Devil engine was not just for propulsion. Soldiers discovered that, with a power takeoff unit, the Jeep's engine could be used to run a variety of equipment in the field. It could power a generator to light a command post or a field hospital. It could run a water pump to drain a flooded position, or a circular saw for combat engineers. The vehicle was, in essence, a mobile power plant, a critical piece of infrastructure in places where none existed. The creativity of its users knew no bounds. On hastily constructed airfields in the Pacific and Europe, Jeeps were designated as follow-me vehicles, guiding massive bombers and transport planes to their parking stands. In the railway yards of France, special kits were developed with flanged steel wheels that allowed Jeeps to drive on railroad tracks, enabling them to be used for inspecting lines for sabotage or for light transport along the rail network. This railway conversion was a testament to the platform's incredible adaptability. An even more ambitious modification was the Ford GPA, an amphibious version of the Jeep nicknamed the Seep, a portmanteau of Sea Jeep. The Seep featured a watertight hull, a propeller at the rear, and a rudder for steering in the water. While its performance in rough seas was not always optimal, and its production was limited, it represented the willingness of designers to push the boundaries of what the basic Jeep platform could do. It saw service in the Sicily landings and on the Eastern Front, where it was used for river crossings. The Jeep also served as a prime mover for light artillery. It had the power to tow the 37mm anti-tank gun, the 75mm pack howitzer, and various mortars, allowing artillery support to keep pace with the fastest-moving infantry units. A small convoy of Jeeps could transport an entire artillery battery, guns, crews, and ammunition to a forward position with astonishing speed. Perhaps its most humble, yet most essential role was simply as a transport for the common soldier. It carried troops to the front lines. It brought them back for a few precious hours of rest. It delivered mail from home, and it ferried hot meals from the field kitchens. It was a small piece of mechanized relief in a world of exhausting marches and cold nights. It was more than a machine. It was a trusted companion, a mechanical mule, as it was often affectionately called by the GIs, who appreciated its stubborn refusal to quit, no matter what was asked of it. Each of these 1,000 different faces revealed another facet of its brilliant design: simple, rugged, and endlessly adaptable. Section 9. The Verdict from the Other Side of the Hill. By the winter of 1944 and into the final months of the war in 1945, the German military's perception of the Jeep had completed its 180-degree transformation from derision to deep, professional respect. The initial laughter had long since been silenced by the hard realities of combat on multiple fronts. The small, toy-like vehicle was now seen for what it was: a key component of the Allied war machine and a symbol of the very mobility that had once been the hallmark of the German blitzkrieg. This newfound respect was evident in the actions and reports of German soldiers and officers. A captured Jeep was no longer a curiosity to be mocked. It was a highly prized piece of enemy equipment. German units would go to great lengths to recover and press into service any Jeep they could find. They would paint German crosses over the American star and use them for the same purposes their enemies did, as staff cars, reconnaissance vehicles, and all-terrain transports. The irony was not lost on the German soldiers who found themselves driving a vehicle that was, in many ways, superior in difficult terrain to their own standard-issue Kübelwagen. The Jeep's four-wheel drive capability was particularly coveted. For a German soldier struggling to push a staff car out of the Russian mud or the muck of a Normandy lane, the sight of a captured Jeep effortlessly pulling itself free was a powerful and frustrating lesson in engineering philosophy. It highlighted a key weakness in their own light vehicle fleet. This respect filtered up to the highest levels of the German command. After-action reports from the fronts in Italy and France frequently mentioned the exceptional mobility of American units, often attributing it directly to the massive number of Jeeps at their disposal. German intelligence assessments noted that the Americans could move supplies and reinforcements across terrain that German planners had designated as impassable for wheeled vehicles. This had significant tactical implications. It meant that American commanders had more options. They could execute flanking maneuvers through dense woods or across marshy ground, bypassing heavily defended roads and catching German units by surprise. The Jeep allowed the Allies to maintain their operational tempo even when infrastructure like roads and bridges had been destroyed, either by retreating German forces or Allied bombing. While a German column might be halted by a demolished bridge, an American reconnaissance unit could often find a way around it, fording a stream or navigating a rough track, all thanks to their versatile little vehicles. The contrast between the two industrial philosophies became starkly clear. German soldiers would marvel at the simplicity of a captured Jeep's engine and chassis. It lacked the refined complexity of their own engineering, but it was precisely this simplicity that made it so effective. It was easy to understand, easy to maintain with basic tools, and its parts were standardized to an incredible degree. A German mechanic, accustomed to the specific tolerances and specialized tools required for a Mercedes or Horch engine, would look at the Go Devil with a mixture of professional disdain and practical envy. One was a work of art, the other was a tool. But in war, the reliable tool often proved more valuable than the delicate work of art. In the final, desperate battles inside Germany, the Jeep was everywhere, a constant symbol of the Allied advance. It was seen parked outside command posts in captured towns, carrying military police through ruined city streets, and ferrying supplies to the units pushing ever eastward. For the German soldier, it was no longer a joke. It was a symbol of the enemy's seemingly endless resources, their industrial might, and their pragmatic, effective approach to the tools of war. It was a rolling testament to the fact that victory in a modern, mechanized conflict depended not just on the power of your heaviest tanks, but also on the strength and reliability of the smallest, most numerous links in your logistical chain. The verdict from the other side of the hill was clear. The little American toy had helped win the war. Section 10. A legacy forged in steel, enduring in spirit. When the guns fell silent in 1945, the world was awash with the machinery of the conflict. Tanks, planes, and warships, the great symbols of military power, were gradually decommissioned, scrapped, or placed in museums. But one vehicle, the humble Jeep, made a seamless transition from the battlefield to civilian life, its legacy not only enduring, but growing with each passing decade. In the immediate aftermath of the war, thousands of surplus Willys MBs and Ford GPWs were left scattered across the globe. They were sold or given to Allied governments, put to work in the monumental task of reconstruction. In the fields of France, they replaced farm animals, pulling plows. In the rebuilding cities of Germany and Japan, They hauled rubble and transported materials. In the developing world, they became the go-to vehicle for exploration, agriculture, and transportation in remote areas where roads were a luxury. The Jeep had proven it could win a war. Now, it was helping to build the peace. Willys Overland, recognizing the immense affection and brand recognition the vehicle had earned, wasted no time in creating a civilian version. In 1945, the company introduced the Willys CJ2A, the first civilian Jeep. It was marketed to farmers, ranchers, and industrial workers as the all-American farm horse. It was largely similar to its military predecessor, but with some key changes for civilian use, including a tailgate, side-mounted spare tire, and more conventional headlights. The CJ series was an immediate success and would continue to be produced in various forms for over 4 decades, laying the foundation for an entirely new category of automobile, the off-road recreational vehicle. The Jeep's influence on global automotive design cannot be overstated. After the war, nearly every industrialized nation sought to create its own version of a light, rugged, four-wheel drive utility vehicle. The British developed the Land Rover, which was directly and admittedly inspired by the American Jeep. In Japan, Toyota reverse-engineered a captured Jeep, a project that eventually evolved into the legendary Land Cruiser. In Russia, the GAZ-69 fulfilled a similar role. The Jeep's basic architectural DNA, a compact body on a sturdy frame with a capable four-wheel drive system, became the blueprint for off-road vehicles worldwide. It created a paradigm shift, proving that a vehicle could be both a practical workhorse and a tool for adventure. The legacy of the Jeep, however, is more than just mechanical. It is a cultural icon. It represents a spirit of rugged individualism, freedom, and the ability to go anywhere and do anything. It embodies the ingenuity and collaborative spirit that created it. A design born from the desperation of a small company, perfected by the engineering prowess of another, and mass-produced by the industrial might of a third. It is a symbol of the arsenal of democracy, a testament to the power of simple, reliable, and functional design when produced on a massive scale. Ernie Pyle, the famous war correspondent, perhaps summarized its contribution best. He wrote that the Jeep did everything, went everywhere. It was as faithful as a dog, as strong as a mule, and as agile as a goat. He believed that, alongside a handful of other key innovations, the Jeep was one of the primary tools that helped the Allies achieve victory. From its frantic, 49-day conception to its ubiquitous presence on every continent, the story of the Jeep is a remarkable chapter in the history of the 20th century. It is the story of a vehicle designed for the grim necessities of conflict that ultimately became a global symbol of peace, utility, and adventure. It is a legacy forged in the crucible of war, but its spirit of resilience and boundless capability continues to inspire new generations, a simple, four-wheeled testament to the enduring power of a great idea.